Hello there, thrill seekers. Ah! Ziggy, did you come to check out what's wrong? I'm okay. I'm okay. Wow, that was a thrilling opening. I got this at the dollar store yesterday, which is now the $1.50 store. Well, they haven't changed their name officially, but they raised their prices. Anyway, this is a Halloween decoration, and I scared Ziggy. So, there you go. That's my Halloween special for you today. I got a question, and as you know, since before your sun burned hot in the sky and before your race was born, I have awaited a question. And it goes like this. He's talking about, according to Nisargadatta Maharaj, in I Am That, which is this book. I've recommended this book and told you how much I like it. He says there are basically two types of desires. Some desires are like grass and can be uprooted easily. Other desires, however, are deep-rooted and basically cannot be abandoned. They must be followed through to the end. Now, this has become a real turning phrase for me in the past few weeks. Some desires, new phones, sports cars, etc., that basically mean nothing to me. But on the other hand, the desire for things like love, validation, respect, sexual gratification, etc. seems so compelling that I don't think I could give them up if I tried. It feels like the best I might be able to do is suppress them, which would likely only strengthen their hold over me in the long run. So there are two questions. One, from a Zen perspective, what would it mean to say that certain desires are deep-rooted in us, as Nisargadatta suggests, and what does it mean to follow through with these desires if our goal in Zen practice is to realize the fundamental emptiness of all things? Shouldn't we just try to acknowledge that everything is transitory and simply drop mind instead? And number two, it often seems to me that the things I desire most feel like the most difficult to attain. Part of the reason I seem to desire that love or validation so much is because it feels exactly so far away. If it could be had easily tomorrow, I probably wouldn't feel such longing for it. But this seems to put me in a kind of double bind. I recognize that the arising of this desire is simultaneous with a feeling of suffering. I can't seem to fulfill the desire, and I can't seem to let go of the desire. I can't spit out the red-hot iron ball. That's a phrase that's sometimes used in the Rinzai sect of Zen. And I thought this was an interesting question because it gets into the whole notion of desire as it applies to Buddhism, and that's a big question. Now, I don't know exactly what quotation he's taking from Nisargadatta Maharaj, but one that immediately sprung to mind is one that I noticed myself, which appears on page 87, if you want to go look it up yourself, Personality and Obstacle. And it says, weak desires can be removed by introspection and meditation, but strong, deep-rooted ones, deep-rooted desires, must be fulfilled and their fruits, sweet or bitter, tasted. Now, I don't think that's exactly the quote that he was referring to, but I think it's an interesting one, and I'd like to kind of see where we can go with that in a little video. Nisargadatta Maharaj also says some other interesting things in this book about desire that I'd like to kind of acquaint you with. When you want something, ask yourself, do I really need it? And if the answer is no, then just drop it. Easier said than done. And he says, nothing can make you happier than you are. All search for happiness is misery and leads to more misery. The only happiness worth the name is the natural happiness of conscious being. Your desire just happens to you, along with its fulfillment or non-fulfillment. You can change neither. You may believe that you exert yourself, strive and struggle. Again, it all merely happens, including the fruits of the work. Nothing is by you or for you. All is in the picture exposed on the cinema screen. Nothing is in the light. He uses that metaphor often of that life is sort of like a picture appearing on a screen, and the light is what is really making it happen, like the light that runs through a film on a projector. Nothing is in the light, including what you take yourself to be, the person. You are the light only. And here's another one. Desirelessness comes on its own when desire is recognized as false. You need not struggle with desire. Ultimately, it is an urge to happiness which is natural as long as there is sorrow. Only see that there is no happiness in what you desire. And here's the last one I want to give you. The entire universe strives to fulfill a desire born of compassion. So those are all good, and, we should think about those. One of the things I want to start with is that my teacher, Nishijima Roshi, was not a great fan of the standard way of understanding the Four Noble Truths, and that really relates to desire. So this is on page 1 of his book, Three Philosophies and One Reality, and NHK Radio Talks. I think this is available as a print-on-demand from Amazon if you go look it up. I think that's the only place you can get it. We are told that in this first sermon, the Buddha preached the Four Noble Truths, and that the Four Noble Truths are dukkha satya, the truth of suffering, samudaya satya, the truth of the origin of suffering, nirodha satya, the destruction of suffering, and marga satya, the truth of the right way. And usually this is given as all life is suffering, the cause of suffering is desire, eliminate desire and you eliminate suffering, and the Eightfold Noble Eightfold Path, which is the elimination of desire by following the Eightfold Path. Nishijima Roshi saw it differently. He said, in his interpretation of the Four Noble Truths, I thought that dukkha satya, or the truth of suffering, was the ancient Indian way of expressing idealistic philosophy. When we are full of ideals and anxious to realize those ideals, we inevitably suffer from being unable to realize them. I thought that samudaya satya, or the truth of aggregates, might in fact refer to the aggregates of paranamu, the Sanskrit word for the smallest particle of matter in existence, the modern atom. The truth of aggregates would thus refer to the primitive science of matter, to the philosophy of materialism as it existed at the time. Now that was a hard bridge for me to go over, because I always heard the cause of suffering is desire, but there is a precedent for what he says, because in Chinese it is given as the truth of aggregates. So that is where he gets that. Then I interpreted nirodha satya, the truth of the cessation of or denial of suffering, to mean dialectic synthesis, a negation of idealism and materialism. And marga satya is the truth of the right way, and is his recommendation, Buddha's recommendation, to practice zazen. That's the way he saw the Four Noble Truths. So completely different from the standard interpretation. So that's where I'm kind of coming from with this. Now, when it comes to desires, deep-rooted or not so deep-rooted, I have to agree with Nisargadatta Maharaj. In my own life, I've seen this happen a lot. Certain desires that were maybe planted very early on in my life, or very heavily reinforced by society and the sorts of encounters I chose to make myself available to. That doesn't make any sense. This is the way I lived my life. It rooted some really deep desires which were only able to be overcome. The only way I was able to overcome them was to actually go through and just do the darn thing, and then go, oh yeah, that kind of sucked. And you can probably come up with examples in your own life, and if you can't come up with examples in your own life, I would suggest that you look more closely at your own life, because you probably find out that there's a lot of that going on in your own life. So that's true. The other thing is, there are these desires that are so deep-rooted. I personally, if you want to know my opinion, don't think you can ever get at them, because I think in a sense what we are as a living being is a manifestation of desire. So, if you really want to get slightly icky, your parents had some kind of desire, and that's what made you happen, and then because you happened, you are the outgrowth of their desire, which is more of a universal sort of desire that doesn't even begin and end with just your parents, right? So you're the outgrowth of that, and your very existence is desire. So in order to continue my existence, desire happens. Desire to eat, desire to breathe, desire to poop, whatever, those kind of things. In order to just continue my existence at all, those desires have to be fulfilled constantly, So there's no overcoming that, which I think is where Nishijima Roshi parted with the way of understanding desire as explained in most ways of interpreting Buddhism. The standard way of interpreting the Four Noble Truths is you must overcome desire. And he said, well, you can't overcome desire. There's some desires that are so deeply rooted, you're never going to be able to overcome them. Now, what I've found useful in my life is to try not to burden other people with my desires. Now, of course, this is impossible to do 100% of the time, but most of the time you can kind of look at your desires and say, is fulfilling this desire going to burden some other person? And if it will, then maybe pull back on that one. That's my way of looking at it. And this may be one of the reasons that a lot of religious practices emphasize trying to deal with sexual desire, because most of the time sexual desire involves imposing my personal desire on someone else. Of course, there are ways to do it without imposing on someone else, but we don't need to get into that. But most of the time it involves imposing it on someone else. And there's a story that I remember kind of along with this that I think is instructive. And I tried this morning to find it because I only came across it recently, and I know it was in a book by Kosho Uchiyama, but when I looked through, I thought it was in Opening the Hand of Thought, and maybe it is, but I couldn't find it. But it goes like this. Kosho Uchiyama was he sort of inherited this temple called Antaiji from Kodo Sawaki, his teacher. So he was in charge of this. And there was a woman who kept coming to that temple, and Kosho Uchiyama had a strong desire for her. And I don't know if it was because he was married or because he was trying to keep a vow of celibacy or for whatever reason, he decided that was not a desire that he ought to try to fulfill. So he noticed that the desire seemed to wax and wane according to the weather, and it especially was seasonal. So in the spring it was very strong, and then it kind of faded out. So he decided to wait out the spring, and when summer and autumn and winter came, the desire faded, but the problem was when next spring happened, it came back again. So he decided to wait it out again. In the story he tells, I think he waited it out 3, 4, maybe 5 years until finally this desire for this woman who kept apparently attending the temple finally just subsided and was gone. So that's one way to deal with desires, to just kind of wait it out. Any desire you have will pass. And when I want to see evidence of that in my own life, I can just go through my stuff, and I'll always find something that I'll go, why did I even want this? And not only did I want this, but I bought it and I brought it home, and here it is now. I last year got rid of a lot of stuff in that category, so I don't have nearly as much as I used to, but I still come across it. So we all have desires that wane over time, and something that seems to be very compelling right now, if you wait it out, will not seem so compelling. Another aspect of desire that I find fascinating is, I've seen this in myself, I can tell you an example right now where it's going on, is the desire for desire. When desire itself wanes, I tend to find that I then have a desire to have desire. Just last week, I think, I got a check from the state of California, one of these checks that they're sending out these days. And it was for $600, and I'm like, geez, $600. Now I know I should put that to something sensible, but I'm going, boy, I could get, a new bass, or, I don't know. I'm just going through the things you could get with $600. And I just didn't want it. There was nothing I could think of. I actually went online, kind of going through eBay, going, is there any bass here I want? And I just didn't want it. And at that moment, the desire for desire arose. So I think that is something we have. We kind of keep pushing ourselves to desire more, even when desire itself wanes. You can see this in late night TV commercials aimed at men of a certain demographic, if you want to look at it that way. That happens too. So those are some aspects of desire I think are important to point out. And finally, I'll say that desire is always just a thought. So it's just another thought that comes up in your head. And because of the certain, the trajectories of our own lives, there are certain desires, certain thoughts that are going to kind of be on a loop, and you may be able to avoid them for a little while, but they'll come back again. That's just the way it goes. I think Zazen practice can help with that. the thing is, you're never going to transcend desire. Okay, I don't know. Maybe you can. Maybe you're that one special person, or maybe you're going to write in the comment and go, so and so, master blah de da, has transcended all desires. You should take a look at that. I just don't believe it. I don't believe we can ever completely transcend desire. So the only thing we can do with desire is learn to live with it. And like I say, don't burden others with your desires is a good rule of thumb I find. And waiting them out is something that's useful. And sometimes you just gotta fulfill it and see what happens. And that's the only way you're gonna get rid of it. That one can be a little bit of an excuse sometimes, but so I don't recommend you lean too heavily on that one. But sometimes it's just the only way it's going to work out. Okay, well, that's my talk about desire. I hope that was interesting to you. If you want to send me things, send me money for things I desire, you could go to the URL you're seeing on the screen. Let's see, that's hardcorezen.info/donate. hardcorezen.info/donate. That's where you'll find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts, which are my only way of making a living. So I really appreciate your support. Also, a little plug for my friend Shozan Jack Hobner and his video channel, which is called Zen Confidential. Check that out. I highly recommend it. It's got some good stuff on there, and it's not getting nearly enough views. Sort of similar to my channel. That's it for me. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Okay. Apparently Ziggy is sure that I'm okay, so he's able to relax. We'll just leave him relaxed.